They really are the shining stories as far as India is concerned, but the obvious question is why can't these stories shine back in India, and which is a better context than to talk about all of that as Prime Minister Modi makes his maiden visit to the West Coast. Indeed, joining me on the show, Arvind Gupta, who is also, of course, a part of the BJP's IT cell, a very, very familiar name in television channels across the country. Arvind, thank you very much for being with us. Monisha, Perkash, Arvind Singh, and Mr. Amit Srivastava. Thanks each one of you for being with us. I mean, I'm going to begin by talking to you about the context really is the Prime Minister's visit, his first only to the West Coast. It means a lot because he's the only second Prime Minister to be coming to this side of the US. Everybody comes to New York, Washington, does their policy diplomat gig and goes away. What does this visit really mean for the community that we are addressing here?
See, the Prime Minister has understands the value of innovation and research and the startup community in building his pet project of Digital India.
Right.
And I think this is the Prime Minister's way of coming and learning from the cradle of innovation and startup community to the world, to what are the lessons he can take back, and also on the reverse represent the startup community of India, the throbbing industry that we have now in India, to tell their story to the biggest investors in the world, which are based here in the Valley.
That's a fair point indeed. He's going to learn the lessons here and also perhaps take some of that back. Monisha, I'm going to start with you. You're a startup here, a very successful valuation. Why is it that you could do this in Silicon Valley, and why can't people replicate the same success back home in India? So the obvious question is, what will it take for in India to replicate the Silicon Valley-like ecosystem? What were the enablers for you here?
There's a very unique mindset here. The mindset is one that encourages risk-taking and failing, and learning from those failures, and the belief that that is where innovation comes from. There's also a mindset of collaboration, even if it means collaborating with some of your competitors, because the belief is that saying, the rising tide lifts all boats.
That's right.
And with that kind of mindset of risk-taking and collaboration, really magical things can happen in innovation.
So cooperative competition is what they sometimes call it, and that perhaps is the key to success. Arvind, I'm going to come across to you, and the whole idea really, like Monisha spoke about, is that there is this culture of risk-taking. People are willing to take those risks, even at the cost of failing, because there are crucial lessons to be learnt there. Do you believe at one level it's not just the government or the startup community in India that is to be blamed, but it is also a cultural ethos? We do not celebrate success back home.
India is sort of more in tune with the Asian culture. So if you look at Japan, you don't want to stick out. And in India, it's the same thing. You don't want to come across as bragging. You don't want to stick out. But I think it can be balanced. Being a founder, being an entrepreneur does not mean that you have to be boastful. You have to be just pushing your name out. But I think it's important to put out your conviction, to put out your views, and let people know what you stand for. That's one aspect of it. And like Monisha said, I think in addition to risk-taking, there's a lot of other things that have come together here. There's this whole flywheel of, there's a culture of risk-taking, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, there's a lot of second-time, third-time, fourth-time entrepreneurs who want to give back. There's ample supply of money. There's the service providers like investment bankers, lawyers, and so on. And then there are corporations that are willing to pay a healthy premium to buy these companies. So there's Googles, Oracles, Facebooks, Microsofts that are willing to reward the labor of an entrepreneur. And I think that culture hasn't existed in India. Companies want to do it all. Reliance wants to own it all. Tata's want to own it all. And I think with Flipkart, Snapdeals, what you're going to find is there's going to be this second generation of companies, like PayPal spawned many companies here in the Valley.
That's right.
There's going to be this second generation entrepreneurs that are going to come out of these companies. There's going to be mentors that are available. And I think there's these companies that are going to be willing to pay to acquire these companies.
It's a very interesting point that you bring, and I'm going to take a cue and come to you, Amit, because, startups is a different, they say it's a different DNA to be an entrepreneur. Not everybody can be one. You represent the big daddy here, the Oracle. Why is it that the big guns here in the Silicon Valley, or for that matter United States, are willing to collaborate, are willing to go out there and mentor, are willing to go out there and pay that premium to buy the companies? Why is it that that culture, suddenly when you're in India, a Bangalore, a Bombay, a Delhi, doesn't see that culture? Is this because the big guys are too obsessed with themselves. They don't want to promote the second layer. I mean, what does this really boil down to?
Well, I think the big guys here, like you said, I mean, they are working with the startup community here, encouraging them, doing the research. I think one of the key points is around building the startups is the reason to build here is because people really want to build something. It's not a path to a fast buck, if you will.
That's right.
There is a perception that from a India standpoint, that people are there to do a startup to make a fast buck.
Right.
If you look at these entrepreneurs here, they built something because they had a passion for building. And once you have that passion for building, that leads the path to success. So I think that's why the big corporations here are very engaged with the companies here more than in India, because they feel that the passion is here to build something that will eventually lead to a better product.
So it's not really making the big buck on the fly. Arvind, I'm going to ask you, India's seeing a plethora of startups come out there. People are talking about the billion-dollar babies, plenty of money chasing those startups. From an India standpoint, and we were talking about the enablers, the Silicon Valley-like environment in India. Do you believe at one level it's the startup community that also has to be blamed? Because even now, what you're really seeing is the consumer internet space that's booming. Those are the kind of companies that are really on the fore. 80% of the funding that's coming in is actually chasing 20 companies in startup space. Who is to be blamed for this? Because there isn't enough innovation and not enough enterprise that's perhaps being tapped.
Well, actually, nobody's to be blamed. I think we need a few successful startups. We need a few successful role models. And as Harpinder said, we need those second generation entrepreneurs which have been successful, been there, done that, to mentor the next layer. So I think it's a welcome step that we'll have maybe 20. I wish that number was 100 very successful companies. And to answer your question, this is currently the risk issue. The venture capitalists, the funders are also looking at the less risky options. When real innovation and real societal problems start getting solved by the Indian entrepreneurs, you're going to see them being funded appropriately. The other aspect to that is the Digital India program is really about 15 months old since the new Prime Minister took office last May. So and now the emphasis is on healthcare, education, financial inclusion, given that we have just added 180 million people to the banking system. So you'll see a lot of innovation happening in the societal problems of fintech and health and education. It is that cycle. It is that cycle, and it takes that time.
It's an interesting point that you're bringing. Yeah, you want to add to that?
And if I can add to it, I mean, being consumer-facing, having consumer startups, I think there is nothing wrong with that. I think that goes to the core strength of what's driving innovation in India. So if you look at Israel, for example, the core innovation is on security, in cloud, and so on, because that's what Israeli army does. If you look at Japan, their core strength is IoT or industrial engineering. Likewise, in India and China, the big headline is the 300 million middle class.
That's right.
So it's obvious that that's where you're seeing the first generation of companies come about. But I think you will see, to feed those companies, there's going to be innovation in supply chain, there's going to be innovation in fintech, and so on. So I think that's the next layer as you peel the onion.
Fair point indeed. As we peel the onion, we're going to get plenty of headlines here. But Monisha, I want to take this question and talk to you about the bit that got spoken about, the startups, the innovation. The question really is, Arvind spoke about Digital India. It's a great initiative. It's a great line. It's very well intended. As a very successful startup yourself with great valuations, it was easy to do this here because you had the bandwidth. There was a data push. In India, costs are still very high as far as the spectrum is concerned. People are not willing to invest so much as far as the telecom operators go. How would you want the government to address some of those issues? These are things that you may have not struggled with back in here.
Perhaps the government should provide more incentives for investors to take risks. So, for example, my co-founders and I came together through an incubator program backed by Eric Schmidt's venture fund Innovation Endeavors before the co-founders even knew what opportunity we wanted to work on. But this investor said, look, we believe in you, the three of you, that we're going to give you 6 months of runway to figure out what business idea you want to work on. Right. That was an incredible risk that they took. And so perhaps if the government of India can also incentivize and encourage other investors in India to take that same approach to develop and give opportunities to entrepreneurs who otherwise may not seek it.
Right. That's an important point here, incubation as one level. As a big daddy here, so to say, not just a startup, I want to ask you a very obvious question. Do you believe some startups in India and the success stories that are beginning to get written about are actually mental models of the Western success stories? I'm going to go back to, and sound a little repetitive with innovation. They are mental models of what the Western success stories are. They are modeled on, as good as cash is flowing in, they're thriving, but once the cash taps stop, there could be a crash landing. Is that something that kind of bothers you?
Well, I think these models are global models, right? So it's not that they're a copy of the Western model. That's how business is done. And I think to the part around, that's why you have to invest in the people. You have to have the risk-taking ability. So I think that if some of those abilities come into India, then it's not that they're emulating the West, but that's how those are sort of good business practices that need to be followed. And I think to that point around the Digital India campaign that Arvind pointed out, I think the personal involvement of the Prime Minister and his visit here it's part of the branding. It's part of that. It's not just another government message. And there are lots of programs, but here are programs that it's flowing down from the top. So I think those are just good business practices that are being followed. I wouldn't say it's good or bad emulation, but it's just good business.
As Prime Minister Modi makes this historic visit, and we wrap this leg of the discussion here, startups is obviously a booming community, and you would want to replicate these models back home because you would want people to be wealth creators and not just underwriters, so to say. But what are the three big things that he can take away from meeting the community and the sharpest minds that we're speaking to?
See, the startups will find a way, the entrepreneurs will find a way to be in India or anywhere else the markets exist. I think, as everybody on the panel said, they need 3 or 4 key things. One is the ecosystem, the government support in terms of the investment, ease of investment coming in and coming out. And third is a research, incubation, and innovation ecosystem. And I think the Prime Minister is walking the talk. You talked about branding, and Harpinder rightly said that branding is important because, the world hears those key lines and understands and sees the vision of the government. And Digital India and Startup India is a holistic vision the government and the Prime Minister himself is leading. So, it's important that the world understands what India needs and for India to really, invest. And the Prime Minister has already shown his commitment in investing in, for example, Internet of Things, the smart cities, the center of excellence in big data. So, a few steps are there, but he's walking the talk. He's coming here to learn and share his experiences. And to answer your question of whether it's just a rhetoric, it's not. For him, it's a very serious thing, and this visit shows how serious he is about the transformative power of technology and digital to reshape India of our future.
And to reshape our lives, and we're big stakeholders there. Thank you very much for speaking to us. We're bringing this program to you from the Stanford campus, right here at the Cooper Cafe. This really has been, as they say, the kindergarten to many big entrepreneurs and the big tech titans, or the tech czars, we call them, of the Silicon Valley. And we hope that India can replicate this model back home. Startup India, Stand-up India, but it's really the big buck that matters. What kind of funding comes in and who are the guys putting in their money? Who are the people who really have their skin in the game? And joining me, a very expert panel right here at the Stanford campus. I've got Madhu Vijayan, I've got Ram Shanmugam, of course, I have Arvind Gupta with me. I've got Ravi Thomas, and I've got Sanjit Singh Dang. Thanks each one of you for being with us. Arvind, I'm going to again begin with you. We just spoke to the startups and, the kind of enabling environment that they could be in India to replicate a story like this. It all boils down to the money. You may have a super idea, it may be super innovative, but if you don't have the funds to scale it up, it's worth no dime. Is this the biggest part of the value chain that India lacks presently?
Well, it's part of the value chain. With the funds that are available in the valley, comes a couple of other things. The strategic value of the funds, the mentorship, the relationships, and also a lot of guidance. And what the funds over here and the deep pockets over here have shown, that you can invest in research and innovation over the long term and still get returns out of it. So of course, this is a very essential part of the startup ecosystem, of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and without fuel, the car can't go much distance. So and we are glad that a lot of funds from here, some of whom are represented here, are taking a very active interest in India and investing in India. But I think this activity needs to be at least 10 times greater for the Indian ecosystem to really prosper.
Well, you really put the money where it matters, and before I go around the table, let me just begin from the left. Let me ask you to wear your hat of the man who really buys the stuff out there, the man who's willing to put in the money. How would you dissect the Indian startup system right now? Like I said initially, there's just too much money that's chasing too few companies. Is that an analysis that you kind of agree with here?
So, that's a space that's sort of out of our field of expertise.
I understand.
So we're not a consumer-facing company. But just to follow on Arvind's point, the packaging of money with expert advice, guidance, and sort of a long-term view is sort of India's a greenfield opportunity for that. And that's kind of what drives us. And I think developing that backbone of the investment community is very, very important. So it's a key thing that fuels innovation.
Everybody's talking about how it fuels innovation, but Ram, I'm going to ask you, you did a startup here, you're a serial entrepreneur of sorts. Is it just the money that matters, or is it like, Arvind's been pointing out for a while now, it's the expertise, the guidance, the hand-holding, the incubation that comes with all of it? And does India not just lack the money or the funds that are flowing in, but it also lacks this hand-holding at one level?
So I've been in this business for about 15 years, and 10 years ago, if you asked me this question, I would agree with you. Things have dramatically changed in India now, right? So one, you've got a very healthy, vibrant ecosystem of entrepreneurs, people who have done businesses in the past, trying to start new companies, mid-stage managers who are leaving established organizations and willing to take the risk and start companies. The second interesting thing that has also happened in India is the emergence of SME. I'm in the enterprise space, so SMEs are very critical to my success. So the SME growth has also fueled the market adoption of these technologies with India as an end-user market. Previously, you would have companies building companies here, going after markets in the US or outside of India. But now, India itself represents a large market opportunity for the entrepreneurs. So with that comes a huge internal demand, so you can build a successful, thriving business internally as well.
Fair point indeed. Sanjit, let me ask you, what is the checklist like for India, and how is this really different from another market, say the US? When you put the money, how different is the checklist for a startup in India vis-a-vis a startup in the Silicon Valley?
Well, in general, we look for startups that have the gene pool to be able to take it all the way. So like Arvind said, it's not just the money, we look for the right team, and we also look for the right ecosystem. And I think India is getting there, but it's not there yet. Silicon Valley has had rounds of successes over the decades. So there is a gene pool of talent that knows how to take ideas from paper to IPO level or M&A level. That needs to happen in India, and as multiple of those cycles start to happen in India, I think the investor confidence will grow. Investors are looking at companies that can become the next $10 billion outcomes, not just become small outcomes.
Just to voice the investor concern, I mean, one of the concerns that investors do raise very frequently in India is that there's too much happening in the consumer internet space. There's too much happening with the right now economy, but not too much happening with the enterprise space that, that Ram spoke about. Is that a concern you share?
It is a concern, but then I suppose everything has got a logical process of going on. Today we start at the consumer level and then move on to the enterprise level. Basically, as investors, what we're looking at is the overall ecosystem, like everybody has been talking about. That is, who's going to lead and what is the idea. We're not looking only for money. It's a smart money which eventually would make a difference. And smart money would be access to market, the how to go to market strategy, what are the way to go and execute it. So those would be the primary areas what one would be concerned with.
Fair point. Ram, would you agree with me when I say, and we were speaking to the startups before you joined in here, many of them believe that in the Silicon Valley, what works for them is that they have a wonderful idea. It goes to a certain stage. they cash in out of this. They're not really chasing the big buck, they're chasing the big idea, but big giants like a Google, an Oracle, a Microsoft, a Facebook now, they're all willing to leverage the opportunity that these startups create. A buyout opportunity is existing, and which is why perhaps good money comes into these startups. Is that something that lacks in India? Because the big daddies, the big corporates are not really chasing those startups.
That's true. I think
it's almost like they're growing in isolation out there.
That's true. I think innovation strategies for big companies in India have been mostly focused on developing it internally as opposed to acquiring fast-moving, creative, innovative startups. I think the Silicon Valley and the U.S. Enterprises have been largely focused on growth through internal as well as external acquisitions. So to that extent, I think the Indian enterprises, the large incumbents, have to look at startups in India as an opportunity to compete more effectively, not just within the Indian context, but now they're competing with the global market.
Right,
and for them to be competitive, it's extremely important to be fast-paced, innovative, and that talent is only going to come from some of these startups. I think that's definitely something that the Indian enterprises have to look at.
Fair point indeed. I'm going to ask you this. Yeah, sure.
I just want to add on a thing. But this might be a question of the cycle maturity too that you were talking about. Because if you look at Cognizant, for example, they've been buying companies across the spectrum, not just in India but also in the U.S. And that, I think it's a question of maturity. At a certain point, when the industry feels strong enough and confident enough, and that's overall an indicative segment by segment of how the market's growing,
Fair point. Sanjit, will you agree with this, that the confidence that an investor like you gets is when you see the eventual cycle turnaround, when you see that, okay, this is a great idea, this is great innovation, it has to go to an execution stage, and then there has to be a buyout opportunity. Is that something that gives you greater confidence to pump in more funds?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've actually already been implementing in that direction. In India, just to give out a few examples, we are investors in Snapdeal. And we did that early on.
Right.
We are also investors in an ad retargeting company out of Bangalore called Vizuri.
Right.
And there are numerous other examples as well. But from an Intel Capital standpoint, we want to be able to see the teams that are really committed to it. For them, failure is not an option. I want to make it work. And then we are here to provide them the value and the guidance and whatever connections or strategic help they need in terms of growth, company growth.
It's an interesting point that you talked about, because the startups believe that it's important to fail. It's almost like a badge of honor that they celebrate here in the Silicon Valley, which is not really a cultural ethos back home in India. Does the fear of failure put the cycle back 10 years as far as Indian entrepreneurship is concerned and investors like you are concerned?
In Silicon Valley, we don't consider failure as a failure. It's a process of learning. And before one success comes, we are bound to fail a couple of times. While in India, I think there's still a concept that, okay, if you fail, what's the next alternative? No one else may come and fund me. What are my other alternatives that I have? So that becomes a concern. So when we really look at failure from a perspective, here it's more a learning curve. Here we have a lot of mentors who can help us. When we get smart money, they are there with their ecosystem to support us. We have a whole ecosystem here with lawyers, with chartered accountants who don't take funds up front, but would take it later if we are successful. So there's a lot of process of validating each of the project before investment is made.
Fair point.
So if there is a failure, it's failure at a much early stage, so that the level of failure is not too much before we go.
Add to that.
Yeah, I'll just give you the last word to add to that, and also quickly ask you to wrap this up as far as the Prime Minister is concerned. Yes, he's going to speak to the startup community, but he's also going to be speaking to a whole host of venture capitalists and the guys who really put in their money there.
So 2 points. First is on the failure, and being a startup person myself, back in India, when we used to compete with, it was always hiring was a challenge for us. People used to not think working for a startup was the cool thing to do.
Right.
Over the last few years, thankfully that has changed a lot. Today, working in a startup is probably more prestigious than working for a big company.
Yes.
So that has changed, and it takes time for that to change. Now the second thing, what everybody is mentioning is about the failure concept of it, right? I think that will also become slowly part of our thinking and mindset and the societal norms that, failure is okay. These guys have learned what not to do. And a smart person learns what not to do so that they don't replicate the same mistakes the next time. So I think we are getting there. It's not an overnight process. The steps are in the right direction. The leadership at the top is committed to make it happen. And to end my message, I think it's, the Prime Minister is cognizant of this. The government is cognizant of it. There is. You talked about funds. The government has provided a seed fund called the Setu Fund.
Yes.
The government has talked about centers of excellence. The government is talking about academic partnerships. The government is talking about, creating the market, making it easier for angels and startups to get funded and listed in India. So I think all the right steps are being taken to make sure both the startups prosper and the venture capitalists, the investors, they actually get an environment that they can, invest safely and make their money work better and smarter for themselves.
All right, make your money work better and smarter is really the message that's coming in out from our panel here. As Prime Minister Modi gives Startup and Stand Up India a big push, it is the money that counts. What is the kind of failure that India will see before the boom cycle really begins? It's something we'll have to really wait and watch.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.